There is a man standing on the edge of a crowd in first-century Galilee, and he is doing something no one expects. He is not lecturing. He is not reciting. He is not standing behind a table with a scroll, reading the words of Moses in a flat voice while the crowd shifts its weight and waits for it to be over. He is asking questions. Not soft questions. Not polite questions designed to make people feel included before he tells them the answer. Hard questions, uncomfortable questions, questions that stop people mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-thought. Questions that find the thing a person has been hiding for years and pull it into the open like a splinter worked loose from deep skin. What were you arguing about on the road? Which of these three do you think was a neighbor? Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? In the four gospel accounts, Jesus asks over 300 questions. He has asked 183. He gives a direct answer to exactly three. Three. Every other time, he responds with a question, a story, a silence, or a question buried inside a story. The rabbis of his day had a name for this method. They called it Hebruta, a Hebrew word meaning friendship through wrestling. The idea was simple and radical. A teacher who gives you the answer owns the answer. A teacher who asks you the right question hands you something you will carry for the rest of your life. Jesus was the greatest teacher who ever lived. He never wasted an answer when a question would do more. But here is what you need to understand before we go any further. And stay with me, because this changes everything. He already knew.
Every question Jesus asked, he already knew the answer. He knew what Peter would say at Caesarea Philippi before the words formed in Peter's throat. He knew what the woman at the well was hiding before she opened her mouth to deflect. He knew what Lazarus' sisters would say, what the disciples would say in the storm, what the rich young man would do when the conversation got too close to the thing he actually worshipped. He knew, so why ask? That is what this is about, not a list of clever questions from a clever teacher. This is about what it means that the God of the universe, standing in human skin on a dusty road in Roman-occupied Judea, looked at broken and frightened and proud and grieving people, and instead of overwhelming them with answers they weren't ready for, asked them questions they couldn't escape. He is still asking. And one of those questions was spoken in total darkness, with iron through his wrists, and when he asked it, no answer came. We will get to that question, but not yet.
The first time you see him ask a question that truly stops the room, it happens on water. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake, roughly 13 miles long and 8 miles wide, sitting 600 feet below sea level in a natural bowl surrounded by hills. Because of that geography, storms come fast. Fishermen who have worked the lake their whole lives know this. They have felt the wind change, watched the color of the water shift, seen the clouds stack on the western hills, and known what was coming. 4 of Jesus' closest disciples are professional fishermen: Peter and Andrew, James and John. These are not soft men. These are men who haul nets in the dark, who know how rope feels when it is loaded with 600 pounds of fish, who have navigated this lake in conditions that would terrify anyone raised inland. On the night in question, they're crossing the lake in the dark. Jesus is asleep in the stern, his head on a cushion, which is one of the most specific and therefore most trustworthy details in the entire Gospel of Mark. A storm comes, not a moderate storm. The Greek word Mark uses is lailaps, a sudden violent squall, used elsewhere in ancient Greek literature for storms that sink ships. The waves are breaking over the side of the boat. The boat is filling, and Jesus is still asleep. The disciples wake him. What they say is not a calm request. The text says they wake him and say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" That is a desperate sentence. That is the sentence of men who've moved past professional competence into raw animal fear, who are looking at the man they gave up their livelihoods to follow and asking him the most human question in the world. Don't you care? Jesus stands up. He speaks to the wind and the waves. The text says there was a great calm, not a gradual settling, not the storm dying down over an hour, an immediate, total stillness, the kind that would have been more frightening than the storm itself to men who understood weather. And then he turns to them. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? He does not explain his power. He does not comfort them with a speech. He asks two questions, and the text says they were seized by phobos megos, a great fear, and said to each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." He turned their fear of the storm into a deeper, better, more productive fear, a fear that was the beginning of understanding. He knew why they were afraid. He was asking because they needed to hear themselves answer. A few miles from that lake, in Jerusalem, there's a pool called Bethesda, in Aramaic, Beit Hesda, House of Mercy. For a long time, historians thought John had invented it. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists excavating the northeastern corner of the old city uncovered it exactly where John said it was, with 5 covered colonnades, exactly as described. Around this pool lie people who are sick, blind, lame, paralyzed. The tradition held that when the water stirred, the first person in would be healed. One man has been waiting there for 38 years. Jesus walks up to him. He has not been asked to help. He simply looks at the man. The Greek word is eidon, to perceive, to take in fully, and asks a question that sounds almost offensive given the circumstances. Do you want to be healed? The man has been lying here for 38 years. Of course he wants to be healed. What kind of question is that? But watch what the man actually says. He does not say yes. He says, "Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." He answers a yes or no question with a logistical problem. He describes his system. He tells Jesus about the process he has developed for managing his situation over 38 years. He does not answer the question. Jesus does not ask it again. He says, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And the man gets up. But do not miss what Jesus was doing. He was not asking for information. He was asking the man to make a declaration, to say out loud that he wanted something different. Because wanting to be healed and being willing to be healed are not always the same thing. 38 years is long enough to build an identity around an illness, long enough to make peace with the pool instead of the life beyond it. Do you want to be healed? One of the kindest questions ever asked, and one of the most searching. It is noon in Samaria, and a woman is walking to a well alone. Women in first century culture drew water in the morning, in groups. A woman who comes at noon, alone, is a woman who has decided that the loneliness of midday is better than the company of morning. You already know why, even before John tells you. Jesus sits down at the well, tired from the journey. John specifies this. And when the woman arrives, he speaks first. "Will you give me a drink?" On the surface, the most ordinary thing in the world. But in the world of first century Samaria, this sentence has already broken 3 rules. He's a Jewish man speaking to a Samaritan woman. He's a rabbi speaking to a woman without her husband present. And he's placing himself, at least momentarily, in a position of need before her. What follows is the longest one-on-one conversation Jesus has with anyone in all 4 Gospels. Longer than Nicodemus, longer than Pilate, longer than anyone. He offers her living water. She thinks he is talking about hydrology. And then, in the middle of a conversation about eternal life, he says it. "Go, call your husband, and come back." She says, "I have no husband." And he says, "You are right. The fact is, You have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband." He does not say this with cruelty. He says it the way a doctor reads an X-ray, plainly, precisely, without drama. The point is not to shame her, but to show her that he already knows, that there is nothing to hide, that the conversation they are having is already past pretense. She does not run. She pivots immediately into theology, asks about where the right place to worship is, Jerusalem or this mountain. She has been carrying that question for years, and Jesus answers her, fully, directly, no parable, no counter-question. He tells her the hour is coming when true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth. He tells her, when she mentions the Messiah, the most unambiguous thing he says to anyone in the Gospel of John before the resurrection. "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." To her, a Samaritan, alone at a well at noon. She leaves her jar and runs back to town. What she says when she gets there is this: "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did." She does not say he told her the good parts. She says everything. And the shame that was exposed and then absorbed by that conversation has become the thing that makes her message credible. The very thing she was hiding is now her testimony. He found her with a question about water. He left her with living water. And he did it by asking her one question he already knew the answer to. Now, pay attention, because the contrast is about to be severe. If the woman at the well represents everything society had written off, the man who comes next represents everything society had approved. Young, rich, a ruler. He runs up to Jesus. Mark says he runs and then kneels, an unusual combination of urgency and reverence, and asks, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus stops on the first word. "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone." This is not false modesty. The word good in Hebrew, tov, the same word used 7 times in Genesis when God looks at creation, was reserved for God. Jesus is pulling a thread. Do you know what you just said? Do you mean it? Because if you do, this conversation is different than the one you came here for. The man does not catch it. He moves forward with his question. Jesus lists the commandments. The man says he has kept them all since childhood, and then Mark adds one sentence that might be the most important in the whole exchange. Jesus looked at him and loved him. He is about to say something that will drive this man away. He knows it, and he looks at him with love and says it anyway. "One thing you lack. Go, sell everything you have and give to the poor. Then come, follow me." The man's face changes. He walks away sad because he had great wealth. He came running, he left walking. Jesus does not chase him, does not soften the requirement. He lets him go, because Jesus, who already knew everything, knew exactly what this particular man was actually worshiping. Not money in the abstract, security, identity, the feeling of being the kind of person who has options. And Jesus, who loved him, looked at that specific thing and said, "This is the one thing standing between you and the life you just asked me about." The question, "Why do you call me good?" was a door. The man chose not to walk through it. We move north, all the way to Caesarea Philippi, a pagan city at the base of Mount Hermon, built around a rock face covered in carved niches holding statues of the god Pan, with a cave the locals called the Gates of Hades descending into the rock. Herod the Great had built a white marble temple to Caesar Augustus here, gleaming against black basalt. This is where Jesus chooses to ask the question. First, the warm-up. Who do people say the Son of Man is? The disciples give the public answers. John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, all honorable, all wrong. Then he narrows it. "But what about you? Who do you say I am?" Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." He asked it in the worst possible place on purpose, right in front of Caesar's temple, right at the mouth of the so-called underworld, right in the middle of everything that claimed power over life and death and human destiny. And he asked his disciples to say out loud who they believed he was. Because saying it out loud in that place, in front of each other, was different from thinking it quietly on the boat. The answer did not change what was true. It changed what was possible for the person who said it. It is early morning in Jerusalem, and the Pharisees drag a woman into the temple courts and make her stand before the crowd. She was caught in adultery, they say. Moses commanded stoning. They ask what Jesus says. John adds a sentence that cuts through any confusion. They were using this question as a trap. Jesus bends down and writes in the dirt. They keep demanding. He straightens up and says one sentence. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. He bends back down. They begin to leave, one at a time, the older ones first, until it is just the two of them. And he asks her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She says, No one, sir. He already knew where they were. He watched them leave. He's asking her to look around, to see with her own eyes that the people who came to destroy her are gone, to register in her own body that she is still. By John chapter 11, a message reaches Jesus from Bethany, a small village on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. In that village live 3 people he loves, 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, and their brother, Lazarus, who is sick. The message is simple. Lord, the one you love is sick. Not come quickly, just you love him and he is sick. They trust that this information alone is sufficient. Jesus waits 2 days before he moves. By the time he arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days. Martha comes out to meet him and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Grief in that sentence, and underneath the grief, something that sounds almost like accusation. You could have come sooner. Jesus says her brother will rise again. Martha gives the correct theological answer. Do you believe this? 3 words. In Greek, pisteues tuto. Do you trust this? Do you stake yourself on this? Does this land in you as true? Martha answers with one of the great confessions of faith in the entire New Testament, spoken by a woman outside a tomb in the worst moment of her life, to a man who just told her something she could not yet see evidence for. Then he goes to the tomb. Mary comes to him, falls at his feet, says what Martha said. The mourners are weeping. And John gives us the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. He already knows what he is about to do. He has known it since before he left. And he weeps anyway, not for Lazarus, for them, for the grief that was real, even though it was temporary, for what it costs human beings to live in a world where the people they love go into tombs. Love does not skip the grief to get to the miracle. Love sits in the grief first. Now we get to the question with no answer. The night before the crucifixion, Jesus takes his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. In Aramaic, Gachmanim, oil press. Olive presses work by placing an enormous weight on the fruit until everything inside is crushed out. The name is not accidental. He takes Peter, James, and John deeper into the garden. He says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." The Greek is perilipos, encircled with grief, pressing in from every direction with no gap to breathe through. He goes a little further. He falls on his face. He asks the Father if it is possible to let this cup pass. He comes back. They are asleep. He wakes them and asks, and even here, even on the worst night of his life, it is still a question. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? Then Judas arrives with torches and soldiers. Jesus is arrested, tried, flogged, a crown of thorns pressed into his skull. and he walks toward a hill called Golgotha, place of the skull, just outside the city walls, along a road where travelers pass, because Rome designed crucifixions to be seen. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing in his annals around AD 116, confirms that a man called Christus was executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. He describes it as the extreme penalty, Rome's most brutal form of execution, designed not just to kill but to humiliate, to strip away every layer of dignity until nothing remained. They crucify him at 9 in the morning. By noon, darkness covers the land, 3 hours of darkness. And then at 3 in the afternoon, he cries out in a loud voice. The words are Aramaic, the opening line of Psalm 22, a psalm David wrote 1,000 years before this moment, a psalm that the Jewish people knew by heart, the way you know the first line of a song. But the words are also a question. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And when he asks it, no answer comes. No voice from heaven, no angel, no cloud, no burning bush. Silence. Sit in that silence for a moment before you move past it, because this is not a decorative detail. This is the theological center of everything. The Son of God taking on himself every question ever asked into an empty sky, every prayer that seemed to dissolve before it reached the ceiling. Every night, someone lay on a cold floor somewhere and said, God, where are you? And heard nothing. He asked it first, from the cross, with his own mouth. Augustine, writing in the 5th century, said that Jesus in that moment was speaking the words of every human being who would ever feel abandoned, absorbing the experience of divine silence so completely that he could redeem it from the inside. He asked the question we were afraid to ask, in the worst place we could imagine, with no answer coming. And 3 days later, the silence broke. It is early on the first day of the week. A woman named Mary Magdalene is standing outside an empty tomb, weeping. She bends to look inside and sees 2 angels where the body had been. They ask her why she is weeping. She turns around and there is a man standing behind her. She assumes he is the gardener. He asks the same question the angels asked. Woman, why are you weeping? Then, before she answers, who is it you are looking for? She still does not know who he is. And then he says her name, Mary. One word, her name, and she knows. She says, Rabboni, Aramaic for my teacher, the possessive form, the intimate form, the form you use for the person whose student you are proud to be. He asked who she was looking for. She was looking for a dead man to anoint. She found instead the answer to every question he had ever asked, the proof that the silence on the cross was not the end of the conversation. Who is it you are looking for? She was looking for Jesus. She found him looking for her. There is a charcoal fire on a beach in Galilee, and the smell of it alone should undo a man. John uses the Greek word anthrakia, charcoal fire, exactly twice in his gospel. The first time is in the courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas on the night of the arrest. Peter is standing at a charcoal fire, warming himself, when 3 people look at him and say, "You were with him, weren't you?" 3 times, 3 people, 3 denials. I am not, I am not, I am not. Luke tells us that at the 3rd denial, Jesus turned and looked straight at Peter, across the courtyard, through the crowd, in the middle of his own trial, and Peter went outside and wept bitterly. Now it is after the resurrection. Peter says, I am going out to fish. The others say they will come. They fish all night and catch nothing. At dawn, a figure on the shore calls out, Have you caught anything? They say no. He tells them to cast the net on the right side. The catch is so large they cannot haul it in. John turns to Peter and says 3 words, It is the Lord. And Peter wraps his outer garment around himself and jumps into the water. 100 yards of cold water between him and the shore. He does not wait for the boat. He does not help with the net. He jumps. Whatever Peter is feeling in that water, and it must be a collision of joy and terror and shame and desperation that has no clean name, he is moving toward it rather than away from it. That alone tells you something about who Peter is underneath the failure. When they reach shore, there is a fire waiting. Anthrakia, the same word. John is not being subtle. They eat together, and then Jesus turns to Peter. 3 times he asks, and the questions are not identical, not in Greek. The first time, Jesus uses agape, the unconditional, self-giving love, the word John uses for how God loves the world. Do you agape me, Simon? Peter answers with phileo, the word for warm personal affection, friendship, fondness. You know I am fond of you. He steps down from the word Jesus used. The second time, Jesus asks again with agape. Peter answers again with phileo. The third time, Jesus changes the word. He steps down to Peter's word. He asks, "Do you even phileo me? Are you even fond of me?" And Peter is hurt because Jesus used his word, the smaller word, the word Peter had retreated to, and asked whether even that was true. And Peter says, "Lord, you know all things. You know what is in me better than I do. Whatever is real in me, you see it." And Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." 3 questions, 3 answers, 3 denials undone. Not by a speech, not by a promise that would never happen again. Undone by the simple act of answering honestly 3 times at a charcoal fire, with the smell of smoke and fish and resurrection morning in the air. Jesus does not restore Peter by making him feel better about himself. He restores Peter by giving him something to do. And Eusebius, the church historian writing in the 4th century, records the tradition that Peter eventually died by crucifixion in Rome, requesting to be crucified upside down, because he did not consider himself worthy to die in the same position as his Lord. The man who said, "I am not," 3 times at a charcoal fire, became the man who died rather than say it again. Something happened on that beach. Before we close, one more question. Not from a gospel, from a road. A man named Saul of Tarsus, Pharisee of Pharisees, student of the great Rabbi Gamaliel, so certain of its theology that he is actively hunting down followers of Jesus and having them imprisoned, is walking to Damascus. A light flashes around him. He falls to the ground, and a voice asks him a question. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Not "stop," not "you are wrong," a question. A question that assumes Saul has a reason, that treats him as a person capable of giving an account of himself. Saul says, "Who are you, Lord?" The voice says, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." That is all. No lecture, no list of everything Saul has done wrong, just a name. I am Jesus. The one you were doing this to, that is me. Saul spends 3 days in Damascus, blind, without food or water, with one question echoing in the dark. Why do you persecute me? The rabbis of his tradition called what happened next teshuvah. Teshuvah, which means repentance, but the literal meaning goes deeper. It means turning, a complete reorientation of direction, of self, of purpose, not just feeling sorry, turning around and walking the other way. One question on a road produced the greatest teshuvah in the history of the church, because that is what the questions of Jesus do. They do not just inform, they do not just expose, they turn people around. Before we close, 3 things to take with you. The first is this: he never asked a question to get information. Not once. He already knew what Peter would say, what the woman at the well was hiding, what Lazarus' sisters believed, what Saul was doing on that road and why. He asked anyway, because the question was never for him. It was always for the person being asked. When Jesus asked, "Who do you say I am?" he was not conducting a poll. He was giving Peter the experience of saying it out loud, in his own voice, in front of the others, at the foot of a pagan temple. Peter's confession became the rock, not because Jesus needed to hear it, but because Peter needed to say it. The answer changes you, not him. He already knows what is true. He is waiting for you to say it. The second thing is harder. The question you have been avoiding is probably the one he keeps asking. The man at the pool had been there for 38 years. Same position, same view, same explanation for why he could not move. And Jesus walked up and asked the one question that cut through it all. Do you want to be healed, or have you made peace with the pool? The rich young ruler came running, got the right answer, walked away sad because the answer required releasing the one thing he had organized his entire identity around. He did not want healing more than he wanted security. The woman at the well deflected a direct question into a theological debate about worship locations, one of the fastest pivots in the New Testament. But Jesus did not chase the deflection. He answered the theology and then came back, gently, to the thing she had been running from. He always comes back. If one of these exchanges landed somewhere specific in you, if something snagged, that is probably not an accident. His questions have a way of finding the exact thing a person has been hoping nobody noticed. He noticed. He is not asking because he is waiting to condemn. He dispersed an entire mob with 8 words. He restored a man who denied him 3 times with 3 questions and a bowl of fish at dawn. He turned the church's greatest persecutor into its greatest missionary with 1 sentence on a road. His questions are not traps, they are doors. The question you have been avoiding is a door, not a verdict, an opening. And the third thing, this is the one to carry the longest. He asked one question with no answer so that every question you bring him will have one. Read that again. On the cross, in the darkness, with the weight of everything pressing in, he asked a question that has no answer. The question of desolation, the question of abandonment, the question of where God is when the silence is so complete it feels like absence. My God, why have you forsaken me? He asked it with his own voice, from his own pain, into his own silence. Not because he doubted, because he was taking that question, the hardest question any human being ever asks, the question that lives at the bottom of grief and illness and loss and despair, and asking it from the inside, absorbing it into himself, so that it can never again be a question that separates a person from God. He went into the silence so that the silence is no longer the last word. He asked the unanswered question so that when you ask it, and you will ask it if you have not already, because to be human is to eventually kneel in the dark and say, "Where are you?" When you ask it, you are not asking alone. You are asking it with someone who has already been there, who asked it first, who knows what it costs to speak into darkness and hear nothing back, and who walked out of the tomb on the 3rd day so that you would know the silence is not the end of the conversation. The darkness of that Friday became the silence of that Saturday, and the dawn of that Sunday morning, in the garden on that Sunday morning, the first word spoken after the resurrection was not a proclamation or a sermon. It was a question. Who is it you are looking for? He came back asking, even after the resurrection, even after the silence broke, even with the tomb empty behind him. He came back with a question because that is who he is. That is how he works. That is the shape of his love. He finds you in a garden, or at a well, or on a beach, or on a road, or in the worst moment of the worst week of your life. And he asks you the thing you most need to be asked. He already knows the answer. He is waiting for you. over 300 questions: a storm, a pool, a well, a courtyard, a mountain, a tomb, a cross, a beach, a road. Every single one aimed at the same thing. Not information, not argument, not debate. A person, a specific known-by-name person standing in front of him with something hidden or something broken or something feared or something worshipped that was not worth worshiping. And he asked, because that is what love does when it has all the answers and chooses over and over again to ask instead. The question he is asking you right now is the same one he asked Peter in the shadow of the gates of Hades, with Caesar's temple gleaming on the rock above them and the sound of the Jordan River running beneath them. Not who do other people say he is? Not what does your tradition say, or your upbringing, or the theology you inherited from someone else. Who do you say I am? That question is still open. It has been open for 2,000 years. And it will stay open until you answer it. If this video meant something to you, share it with someone sitting in a hard question right now. Someone who needs to know the silence they are living in is not the last word. Subscribe if you want more of this. And if you are carrying something heavy today, something you have not said out loud to anyone, consider saying it out loud to him. He's already listening. He already knows. He's just waiting for you to speak.